Welcome to The Conservative Edge. I'm Dr. Joe Corey, your host. This show will give you an edge on the truth. We deal here with the substance of each and every issue. And we are today dealing with the issue of poverty in America. We have a researcher from the Heritage Foundation who specializes in issues relating to poverty. His name is Vijay Menon. He is with the Heritage Foundation, and we are very proud to have you here, sir. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's my pleasure. The issue of poverty is very complex. There are all kinds of programs in this country to deal with it. The Cato Institute counted 126 actually, different programs that deal with poverty issues. 126. I don't know why nobody ever tried to streamline these and make them 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. However, we are here to deal with reality, and reality is we have 126 programs to deal with poverty at the federal level, and there are other programs on the state and the local level. The federal government apparently, and you probably know more about this than I do, spends $630 billion a year. And with the state spending and the city spending and so on and so forth, we're talking about $1 trillion of spending on poverty. Yet, we still talk about poverty. Why?
Well, thank you so much again for having me. And yes, you are exactly right to describe the size and scope of welfare in America today. By our calculations, we spend $1.1 trillion on welfare across roughly 90 means-tested programs, and that's between federal and state government. And we're still talking about poverty today because material hardship isn't the only thing that defines poverty. So since the 1960s, since the War on Poverty was launched, we've spent roughly $30 trillion on aid to the poor, and not even the federal government can spend that amount of money and have no impact on material poverty. But the poor Americans today, they can buy cell phones. They often have multiple TVs. They have households they have homes that are larger than just the average individual in European countries. So the economic conditions of the poor are much better today. But why we're still talking about poverty and why discussions of income inequality obscure the real problem is because our current welfare programs are not promoting things that encourage long-term success and flourishing, namely work and marriage. And so to achieve a long-term gain in poverty reduction, we need to be targeting effectively our programs to those things and not undermining them.
Understood. Let's talk about the state of being poor. So when you are poor, it seems to me you are short on resources, all kinds of resources. If you need to spend money on education, but education in this country now is free. You need to spend money on healthcare. We have Medicaid to take care of your health. You need to spend money on housing. We have a national housing program, and you get subsidized housing or you get free housing. Every step of the way, there is some help coming to you from the government. So after all of these are accounted for, why do people stay in the state of poverty?
So you are right to say that we are an incredibly generous country when it comes to helping low-income Americans. Again, we spend over $1.1 trillion by our most recent estimate on cash, food, housing, medical, social services to take care of people who are truly in need. And that is what welfare benefits are intended to do. But again, these programs, what they're not doing is promoting long-term flourishing. And the things that we know lead to long-term flourishing and human happiness is things that provide you with a sense of purpose and a sense of dignity. And those things include work, and they also include relationship, namely for many people it's marriage. And our current welfare programs are undermining that. So very few of the programs in our current system do anything to promote work. Even the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, which, as you may know, was at the core of the welfare reform that was bipartisan, that was signed into law by President Clinton, even that program exempts 50% of its recipients from work requirements, which are at the core of a work-based approach to welfare, which is very broadly supported by the public. So when our programs are doing that,
But this 50% that you're talking about that don't have to work, are we talking about mothers with dependent children? Are we talking about elderly? Or you're talking about those who are able to work but somehow manage not to work?
We're talking about people who are able to work, yes. So not
able
so
to work.
What is broadly supported by the public is work-capable adults, so not people who are elderly, not people with very young children, not people who are disabled, but people who are capable of work should be expected to work or prepare for work in exchange for benefits. That's not only fair, but it's a compassionate approach, because what low-income Americans really want and need is a job to help provide for themselves and their family. And when our programs are undermining that, they're not doing justice to those people that our policies are intended to help.
Interesting. Some people have argued that the reason why people are not working because they don't have the skills to work. Now, this is a very, very broad subject. We did not educate them properly. We did not train them properly. And there is an apprentice program that really takes these people in and get them ready to be welders or carpenters or whatever. And because of that, these people are not working. Or is it because we set up a system that does not encourage them to work, period? I read a piece that you wrote, which I liked very much, by the way, about the state of California. Our governor decided to find a way by just adjusting the requirements based on unemployment rates of 10% or more. He pretty much exempted all the counties in the state of California. And these guys who are receiving all of these benefits, right, don't have to work. So you could literally be sitting watching television all day, or even taking drugs, or just simply not even leaving the house at all. And you could be in perfect health and still don't have to work. And you could receive all of the benefits. How is that in the best interest of the poor?
Well, it's not. And that's why we here at the Heritage Foundation have, for a long time now, for decades, we've written about this work-based approach to welfare. It is, and it's not punitive in nature. Again, this is something that we hope will help people lead self-sufficient lives. Every additional year of employment that a low-skilled worker aged 18 to 35 works will increase his long-term future earnings by 4%. That is a good thing. And employment is a good thing, and not only from an economic perspective, but from a well-being, a dignity perspective. Having a job gives you a sense of purpose and meaning. That is good for people. And when our programs do nothing to promote and even actively discourage by cutting benefits if you get a job, that is not an effective approach to fighting long-term poverty. It's keeping people dependent on the government instead of letting them lead a life that is full of flourishing and happiness. So we would like to see that.
Yeah, my point here is even deeper than that, if I may. Just if you work, you get paid. Now we all understand that. If you get paid, will my benefits be cut back because I'm making money?
In many cases, yes.
Yes. Now that's a problem right there, right? That's number one. Number two is when people are working, they're not just making money. They're learning how to deal with people, how to talk to customers. They're learning how to keep places clean. They learn how to have relationship with other people who are working and are not dependent on anything else. They learn a great sense of pride in whatever they're doing. And the important thing in here is that all of this prepare them for a better job so they will be off welfare. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I mean, a big issue in our society today is working age men dropping out of the labor force altogether. And that is, as you mentioned, not only an economic problem, but it's a social problem. It's a community problem when people are on the sidelines and they're not connected in any meaningful way to work or to other people for that matter. That is a problem. That's something we need to be concerned about. So our welfare programs need to be doing a more effective job at reconnecting people to society and to work and to productive activity, because that's what leads to flourishing, dignified lives.
I agree with you, Mr. Menon. The government had set up guidelines. If you are single, for example, and in the 48 states, and you're making $12,140 or below, you are considered to be poor, correct?
I don't know that exact statistic, but that sounds about right to me.
Yeah. If you have a family of four, you're at $25,100 below that, you are considered to be poor. Mm-hmm. Now, when the government says you are poor, first, number one is you have no assets. You cannot have any bank account, you cannot own property, you cannot own anything that is of great value. You cannot be invested in the stock market. So they want to make sure they are poor at all levels. You're making below that poverty line, you have no assets of any type, therefore you qualify for what? For benefits that are supposed to address your poverty. Well, if they're supposed to address your poverty, Mr. Menon, how come you're still in poverty 5, 10, 20 years later? How? We spend most of the money right now on healthcare and on food stamps, right? Medicaid and food stamps consume all of that stuff. And then we give you some cash benefits, like, for example, temporary assistance for needy families, supplemental Social Security income, and earned income credit. So you get cash, and you get all of the things that are necessary for life. You get free education, right? You get free training. There are so many training programs in the government. Some of them have more people doing the training as opposed to being trained. What is going on? How could we break the cycle of poverty if, in fact, we require them only to work? Will that be enough? If we just say you cannot receive benefit unless you're doing some work, unless you have a disability, unless you have dependent children who are very young, and so on and so forth. Your comments, please.
That requirement would certainly go a long way towards that. But we do, as you mentioned, you've hit on a lot of things that require a more holistic approach. So, our approach to education, our approach to how we talk about marriage in our society, how we talk about relationships. That's a larger conversation too. But you're right. But within the welfare system, there are reforms that can be made. And to go back to what you were touching on, we're talking about a Census Bureau calculated official poverty rate was about 12.7% when the war on poverty was launched, and is now today about 12.3%, despite trillions of dollars in spending. But that's not quite right. So when we calculate...
Trillions, emphasize that word, trillions.
Trillions, $30 trillion on welfare. But what we're talking about here, when the census is measuring official poverty, they are not counting 95% of the over $1.1 trillion we spend on these programs towards determining who is not poor. So it actually, the poverty rate, when you measure it by what the poor actually spend, so poor families typically report spending roughly $2.40 for every official dollar they report in cash income. When you measure poverty by that, the poverty rate is about a quarter of what the Census Bureau reports. So in terms of material poverty, we're doing much better today than we were doing when the war on poverty was launched, but we're still talking, again, about poverty today, about this cycle of poverty, because this is not a lasting change. And having poor families being easier to buy cell phones and TVs is not helping them achieve long-term flourishing. It's because we're undermining core things that are important to human happiness, namely work, and marriage too, and relationships.
Interesting. By the way, there used to be a marriage penalty if you're really not married.
Those still
receive greater
exist.
benefits. That still exists. Isn't that incredible? I want to point out that ethnicity matters, right? Native American, 27.6% are in a state of poverty. Blacks, 26.2%. Hispanic, 23.4%. Whites, 12.4%. And Asian, 12.3%. Most of the Asians are recent immigrants to this country. They managed to have much lower percentage in poverty than, say, other ethnic groups. What accounts for that, you think?
That's a good question. I haven't done a lot of research into the racial breakdown, but when we're talking about welfare, most welfare recipients today are white. This is not an issue that is segmented, as some would have you believe, to one race or another. This is an issue that affects all races and all types of people. So we do need a system that accounts for all people and all backgrounds, but there is a strong approach that will target all people, which is centered around things such as work and marriage, and that's something that Americans support and that we should continue to double down on regardless of race.
I understand. Now, the support apparently that the poor receives is a function of their income, if they have any income at all that may subtract from it. Family size matters. Composition of the family, if you're very young versus older kids. Age, and definitely age of the principal householder. So the question here is, when you put all of that together, that determines how much they receive. Now, how do they receive those benefits? For example, in case of food stamp, apparently now they send them something that looks like a credit card, right? And you can go to stores that accept those and they'll be done. Housing, you get a housing voucher for the purpose of occupying a house. Are the houses given for free, or depending on your situation, there are some minimum charges? Which one is it? Is it free housing or is it subsidized housing?
It's often subsidized housing. It will depend on your income and your family characteristics, but it'll depend on that. But typically, it's a subsidy, roughly 30%.
And education is free, right?
It depends on what program you're talking about, but often
certainly up to the end of high school, that's all free.
Are you talking about community college?
Community college in the state of California is going to be free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it depends on the state, but oftentimes...
As a former professor, I could tell you categorically, there is not a minority in the world who cannot go for very little money, if any, to college. They are all, if you are qualified, there are all kinds of programs to support you and to make sure you go to college. If you are qualified, if you are ready for college. The problem is we have many people finishing high school who are minorities who can't even read at the 8th grade level. So how could you put those people to college? It's easy to say we should put them in junior colleges. It's easier to say we should have much more rigorous program for them. I agree. I believe, and I really would like your comments on this. The biggest problem in the poverty area is education. Education lifts you up at all levels, mentally, physically, intellectually, and certainly income-wise as you join the labor market. There is no question that if you finish high school, you make more money than if you didn't. There is no question if you finish college, you make more money than if you just finished high school. And there is no question if you go to a certain disciplines, you'll make more money than other disciplines. If you want to study sociology and psychology, that's fine. You earn lower income. But if you want to study the engineering areas, especially these days, you'll make a lot more money. Now, that's the reality. Now, the biggest problem is attitude, psychological, feeling depressed because you are poor, feeling dependent, and you think a life of dependency is okay. How do we break that cycle of dependency on the government? You say, well, give them a job. I say, most importantly, start at the lower scale, which is when they enter school, they have to be ready for school. When they go to school, they cannot be hungry, right? For example, we have the school lunch programs. All the kids eat, even the rich kids partake. Then, when they are in school, make sure they have good schooling, not infested by drugs, not infested by bullies, and so on and so forth. I believe the biggest commitment we could make to the poor is to educate the poor and make sure they are ready for every level of education, starting with kindergarten. Whatever it takes, I think we should do, and that's where the money should be spent. What do you think?
Well, there's a lot there to unpack, but in general, yes, I do agree with you. And while I'm not an expert on education policy per se, we do know that school choice is a big policy area, that policy reform that should be it should be advanced for poor children primarily. So areas where the schools are not helping these children, there need to be reforms that allow them to attend a school that better fits their needs and will help them advance in the long term. And you also hit on, the sequence of how you break the cycle of poverty. And what we know is that if you graduate high school, get a full-time job, and get married before having kids, it's the so-called success sequence popularized by scholars at the Brookings Institute and American Enterprise Institute. That greatly reduces your chances of being in poverty. But many people in low-income communities simply don't either have these role models that are telling them that this is the way to get out of poverty, is do these basic things and you will be set on a course that will help you succeed in the long term. And when we know that people who are succeeding and flourishing in our society, the rich, the top quintile, they are all following this success sequence by and large. So it is a cultural shift that we need to embark on. But there's that, and then school choice is very important, especially for low-income children.
How much does drug use contribute to being in the poverty state?
I don't have any statistics straight up, but we know that drug use is more common in low-income communities, and that is unfortunate. And that is just another thing that adds to the complex problem of poverty in America, unfortunately.
Well, last year we lost 72,000 Americans to drug. If you lose 72,000 Americans to drug, that's more than any of the wars we have fought recently. Isn't it logical to assume that for every person that dies, probably 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, or 10, I don't know what the numbers are actually using drugs, and some of them used excessively to the point of death? So if all of these people are taken into consideration, I mean, many of the people you see on the street, walking the street, many of them you could see they have a very serious drug problem. I mean, if you walk on the beaches in California, you see some of those people, smoking and injecting openly. Is there a special program to get poor people, if you are receiving any of the benefits, you cannot be on drugs? Is there such a program for that?
Well, I think there are, in some programs, there are drug testing requirements to, you have to pass a drug test to be able to receive benefits. But yeah, that is a very complex issue. I mean, the lives of the poor are not easy to understand, and we need a compassionate approach there. But that is something that is a behavior, unfortunate one, that will limit your capacity to succeed in the long term. And we need to do what we can to help those people off of drugs and dependency, substance abuse, and into a productive life. And that's not an easy solution, but it's a worthy goal for us to advance.
I want to go back to the education argument. You have some statistics, I think, put out by an institute similar to yours. And I think it's very important to recognize some of these problems. The poor are 7 times more likely to drop out from school. 7 times. When they start in kindergarten and start in the first grade, they're already about 1 or 2 years behind the other kids. By the time they finish high school, they are 4 years behind. No wonder they eat, they drink they read at the 8th grade level, where everybody is at the 12th grade level. But there is a problem much more serious than that, which is all of our education system right now, I'm talking about public schools, is very much substandard. When we compare ourselves to international standards, we are way behind. I mean, countries that spend almost half of what we spend are beating the pants out of us. South Korea is ahead of us. Finland is like in the top in Europe, and so on and so forth. Small classes, good teaching. What I think we should do, those people who are, especially on the left, who are trying to advocate big time for the poor, why don't you all together and each individual feel a sense of responsibility and go help the school, the local school, any way you can, especially those schools in poorer areas. I'll be happy to do that, and I'm saying it on television. The fact of the matter is, they don't learn much from their parents. They are not ready to go to school because they don't socialize with people who are interested in going to school. And when they are in school, they're always behind. And unless education comes in big time, the cycle of poverty would not be broken. And I feel very, very strongly about that. I am a product of lower income family that made it all the way to the PhD at the Wharton School because I believed in education. I wanted to be in school. Why? Because my parents never gave me a choice. My father was not a rich man by any means. He said going to school is not an option. Doing well in school is not an option. Right? And that is the culture that I have learned from to be the man that I am. So we need these people, all of these great talkers about how to eliminate poverty. The answer is give them free goods. Don't require them to work. California right now is becoming a disaster. Do you realize that we have the highest poverty rate in the country, in California? And why do they stay in poverty? Well, we said, many of them are immigrants, illegal or legal immigrants. So what? If he's in school to learn. Make sure that they learn. Make sure they learn the value of learning. What do you think?
Well, you touched on a lot again, and I wish I was more expert on education policy, but what I do know is, yes, you're right, education is a great equalizer. And Thomas Sowell, famous economist, actually had a piece published yesterday in Town Hall, where he said that when he was growing up in the late 1940s, he went through the New York public school system, and he has younger relatives today, and he's reading their textbooks that they're reading, and the level of that he was learning in math in 11th grade is what they were learning in 9th grade. So that's something that is not good when our schools are sliding backwards. Sorry, the other way around. But yes,
I understand. Now, in terms of expenditures per student, I want you to know that the many states spend a lot of money on education. The state of California spends about $11,500 per pupil. No matter who the pupil is. He could be poor, he could be middle income, he could be rich. If you are in public school, the state is spending $11,500. We need to ask, what are we getting as a society from that expenditure? And are public schools the mechanism for pulling people out of poverty? Or should we try alternative schools? And there are many, I don't want to get involved in all of those details, right? And we all know that you could go to some private schools right now, and you will not cost $11,500. So a voucher system is a possibility, and teachers' performance should be measured in relation to how the kids perform in the public domain. Do they go to college? They don't go to college. Do they go and get a job? They don't go get a job. All of these should be metrics for measuring the effectiveness of schools. And there is nothing wrong with going to trade schools. Trade schools are very important. Learn how to be a carpenter. In Britain, a plumber makes more money than the doctor. A plumber makes more money than the doctor. So teach people to be plumbers, teach them to be carpenters, teach them to have a skill that is saleable in the public domain. Anyhow, our time is up. I am so grateful to you, Mr. Menan, and I really hope we could continue the conversation some other time, because there's so many issues here. I have so many issues to really discuss with you. Unfortunately, time is not our friend today. It's been a pleasure having you. We look forward to seeing you again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
This is The Conservative Edge. I'm Dr. Joe Khoury. Please watch us on YouTube.